I had to actually go back and I actually had to face certain issues. I had to face my inner child. I had to write many letters of anger, letters of forgiveness, letters of love, all these things. I had to go inside and get the root cause of the problem, just like gardening, right? You want to weed it out, you got to pull it out at the roots. That's what I had to do.
Welcome to the My Future Business Show, where we get you in front of your best audience and keep you there. Not only are we interviewing the biggest names in business to help you become even more successful, we're inviting you to book your spot on the show to help you grow your business. So at the end of the call, make sure you fill in the interview application form at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. Hi and welcome back to the My Future Business Show. My name's Rick Nuske, and I have to start off this call by saying to you, or asking you a question. When you stop and you think, hey, I've got a pretty rough life, you have to stop and think, maybe there's somebody out there that's had maybe just a little bit rougher journey than yourself. And with that as the starting point, I'd love to introduce Kathy Tuccaro to the show. How are you, Kathy?
Hi, I'm very good. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, look,
It's a real honor.
it's my privilege actually. I was watching your video as I've mentioned before the call, and I don't even really know you that well, and I have to say I was in tears watching the journey. And for everybody who's on the call today, I want you to listen into this one. This one is powerful. It is real. It is raw. And I think it's really going to be quite helpful for those, those people in the background that are not saying anything, not speaking up, just to know that there is angels around you. There is things that are going to happen in your life that you can turn around. And again, this is going to be a powerful story. So I guess with that in mind, Kathy, where do you think is a really good place for us to start?
Well, how about the beginning?
That sounds like a really good point. I mean, because I didn't know really, given the story, where we should start, because it can be quite a sensitive topic for people.
It is. It's very touchy. It took me 40 years to be actually to acknowledge all the trauma and abuse that had occurred in my life. I had spent my entire life pretending it never happened and just,
Yes.
putting on a mask and saying, I'm fine, I'm tough, I'm a survivor, I'm good. And in reality, I wasn't. I was a walking wound. And it took for me to step away from life. It took for me to lose everything I owned, to end up drunk and homeless on the streets of Edmonton here in Canada
Hmm.
at the age of 42 with nothing. And I lost my nursing career. I lost everything. But it took that for me to acknowledge everything. So um, I took time away from life to talk to realize things that I'll just start from the beginning is that as a very small child, I mean, I was put into foster care where I was sexually molested until I was 4. My very first memory is a hand coming over my mouth, telling me not to scream or cry.
Mm.
And I actually never spoke a single word until I was 4 when my mother came back and got me because she had remarried and life was better. And then I finally, at the age of 4, began to talk. But what my mother didn't realize, number one, is that the family I was with was that awful. And number two, the man she married was a monster. So he was a pillar in the community, loved by all, but behind closed doors, he truly was a monster. Um, the amount of domestic violence, dysfunction, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, I mean, you name it. I spent more time in the doghouse as a child because that was the only safe place that I could get to that no one would think of looking.
And just so
And
everybody's aware, we're
yeah,
literally talking about going out into a doghouse to get away, aren't we?
yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. My dog, yeah, until one day when he figured it out that it was my safe place, he actually took my dog out back and shot him. And so it took everything away, right? I was 7. And at the age of 7, that was the beginning of my running away. And I have ran my entire life. When things would become too complicated or too hard, my way of coping would be to move to a different country, or not a country, move across Canada or move to a different city, and just the geographical move. When in
Hmm.
reality, I couldn't recognize that I had the problem, that it's inside me, right?
Yeah.
So, moving on, like my stepfather, he had molested my stepfather, his father, and his brother all sexually molested my older sister, who was between 9 and 12 at the time. And to this day, she's quite messed up over it. Um, my mom finally got away from him when I was 10, and it was really the struggle was real. She began to drink and try and support three children. I mean, this is back in 1980 when
Yeah, yeah.
there wasn't anything.
No.
And what happened was that at the age of 14, my very first boyfriend was, I was deathly afraid of, because of violence, of everything I grew up in.
Oh, of course.
And so he basically forced me into having sex at 14 out of fear, and he would throw these fits of rage, and it was awful. Then at 15, I got sent back to my foster home initially, when I was 4, the same family, and uh, it started all over again, all these molestations again. I mean, to the point he would follow me everywhere, and to the only safe place I could find was beside his wife in his bed,
Yeah.
right? Just because. Anyway, that turned into a real nightmare. The police were involved into that one, and nothing ever came of it, though. The wife called me, all these names, that I was a troublemaking, little
Such
so
and
and so.
such. Yeah.
And yeah, so by the time I got home and the police had put me on a flight home, nothing was ever mentioned again. So once again, all these traumas I had never spoken about. Everything
Mm-hmm.
was just repressed, repressed, repressed.
Mm-hmm.
So then, I went from 15 to 16. I blossomed into this beautiful young lady, and I began modeling all locally. And I ended up at 18 going to Montreal on my own. I took a modeling course. I started modeling. I was never good enough. No, you're not right. Your size, your eyes, nothing was right. I mean, I was 115 pounds and I was still too fat. And
No.
so I have all these self-esteem issues. And
And you have a
I take
beautiful
really good pictures.
portfolio. I have to say, they are beautiful.
I take great pictures.
Yeah. what's
So
what's wrong with these
anyway,
people?
I know, right? So anyway, but back then I didn't have a voice because I
Mm.
was so trapped by all the trauma.
Yeah.
So at 18, at 19, I ended up in Miami for a modeling agency. And because I didn't have a voice, I went for a modeling shoot, and the photographer afterwards wanted to take me out and introduce me to local, people that are in the industry. So I say, okay. And because I wasn't drinking alcohol at the time, and number one, it's too fattening, so I was drinking a diet pop, and he put something in my drink, and next thing you know, I wake up and he's raping me and laughing and saying it's my fault and I wanted it and all this stuff. And the horror, because I'm trying to remember, the last thing I remember is I'm at the bar, not the bar, at the party, wanting to go home and trying to figure out because I was uncomfortable. And next thing you know, this happens. So I never even told my mother about that. It was so awful. So
Oh.
that didn't work out in Miami. I ended up going back. I ended up going to New York. I stayed there for 6 months, and I modeled there for a big agency, and I had lots of pictures and magazines and lots of stuff going on. But
Mm-hmm.
again, I'm not good enough. I don't have the right height. I'm 5'8". You're supposed to be 5'10" or 11 or 12. 110 pounds, still too fat, too ugly. Your feet are ugly. Your hands aren't right, or whatever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the eating disorder, just everything was really, really tough for me, and I didn't have the right personality or aggressive nature to be in that kind of industry. So I went back to Montreal, and I found a summer job. And getting out of it was a restaurant on top of a hotel
Mm-hmm.
in Montreal.
Yep.
And when the season closed, I went out and had dinner with all the workers. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, I hopped a cab and went home. But just getting out of the cab, getting to the door, um, it was a very dark street, and of course I had one of these big bags, and my keys are in the bottom, and I'm looking for my keys, and I kind of look up and I see four guys coming along, not thinking nothing, right? And I just looking for my keys, trying to get in, and next thing you know, I get clobbered on the head, and I get dragged around, where I was gang raped, but I luckily I call it by the grace of God is that I passed out. But I wake up and
Goodness me.
there's a man on top of me, and it turns out, like, I'm trying to get him off, but of course he won't, right? And anyway, when he was finally done, because I'm in an apartment. I'm like, well, where am I? Like, I'm not understanding how did I go from, the keys to the door to being in
Yeah.
an apartment? And it turns out it was my neighbor. Him and his roommate had
What?
found me behind in the alley, and because the four guys had stolen my money, my purse, my bag, like, my shirt, I just had ripped clothes. And these guys, instead of helping me, they decided to continue on the fun in their
Oh,
apartment.
Jesus.
Anyway, yeah, it was awful. It was absolutely awful. So instead of calling the police like any normal person would do, I was so horrified. I ended up calling the landlord to my apartment because I didn't have the keys. And he comes in, and when I tell him the story, he flies into a rage. Anyway, he comes back. He'd gone to see if he could, beat up the neighbor, but he didn't. He comes back and decides that I needed to be taught a lesson in order, you know how his exact words were, when you fall off a horse, you got to get back on. He says this is the same thing. Most women that get raped are going to be frigid, so I'm going to teach you how not to.
What?
I'm not kidding. I mean, I can't, this is,
Oh,
I can't even make this up. So
no.
he hurt me more than the other. Like, it was awful. Absolutely. And this is the landlord.
Yeah.
And
Oh.
he left feeling that he had done the world of men a favor by helping me, per se. Anyway, so I ended up crawling to the shower, and I laid there for 3 hours, 4 hours. I passed out. I couldn't walk. It was awful.
Goodness.
So after 3 days of laying in the apartment and just, in shock, and instead of calling the police, I realized, oh my God, the landlord, like, he did that once, he's going to do it again. So he's got the keys, right?
Yeah.
And now I have no money, no job, because it was a summer job. I mean, I need to move. Finally survival kicked in.
Yep.
So as I'm going outside to the bus stop to finally look for a job and get going again,
Mm-hmm.
the neighbor who had raped me, him and his roommate were standing across the bus depot,
Mm.
and I froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. And he looked at me, and I knew, like, he recognized me, and he was just reliving that night, and he gave me this sick smile, and that was the end for me. I couldn't function anymore. I had like $10 left. I went up and bought a big bottle of wine, and the next thing you know, I'm on the biggest bridge in Montreal drinking wine. I'm cursing God, and like, how can you do this? I'm such a good person, and all this stuff, and I'm angry, and I'm crying, and I was going to jump. And the next thing you know, as I'm cursing God, literally cursing him, I hate you,
Mm.
this man comes along, and he had this aura of light, I guess is the only way. I truly believe to this day he was my guardian angel.
Mm-hmm.
He comes along, he gently pulls me off the ledge, and he just sat with me. He never said a word. He just sat there. And that is exactly what I needed. Just that, right? And so he ended up walking me off the bridge and brought me to the hospital, where I could get some help. I never said a word the entire cab ride, and magically this cab appeared at the end of the bridge, where it's an area where there is no cabs. It
Makes
was
you
so
wonder,
strange.
doesn't it?
It does. So a week later, I got out of the hospital, and I ended up, because I'm having nightmares, and I tried going to the rape clinic, but they wanted me to press charges, and I thought it'd be too much of a he said, she said, and I had no proof, and so I didn't. Instead, I swallowed a bunch of pills and ended up in the hospital again.
Mm.
um, by that time, I realized I had to get out of Montreal. So I took all the money that I had, and I had a one-way ticket across Canada. I went to the Rocky Mountains,
Mm-hmm.
and I started over.
Yeah.
And in doing so, I mean, I met the father of my daughter now, who's 25. I mean, and I went back to school. I kind of just restarted without dealing with anything. I did see a counselor once or twice, but I couldn't do it. And so instead I focused on school. So the father, like, I married him, but that didn't work out. So I took my daughter, she was 3, and I put myself through nursing school as a single divorced mom with a 3-year-old. And all the while, I'm believing that I had overcome everything, right? So on my graduation day, the proudest picture with my little nursing hat and all that,
Yeah, I saw that.
the smile is like wow, right?
Beaming.
I truly believed that I'd overcome all that stuff.
Mm.
But I didn't realize I had fooled myself into believing
Yeah.
that because I had put it away so deep, and then, you know what? I got this great career ahead of me. It doesn't matter now. What happens in the past stays in the past. How many people say that about their trauma? A
Mm.
lot of
Mm.
people,
Yeah.
right? But I didn't realize that the pain that was inside that vault that I had locked away was actually festering and had become so infected that all my decisions were based on low self-worth and a negative core belief. So what this means is that it directly impacted the choices I made in men. So from 2000 to 2007, I had two relationships that involved such extreme domestic violence. I should be dead 10 times over, and I'm
Mm.
not kidding.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just to give an example, I lived with a shovel on the porch as a reminder of what I'd be buried with. I was strangled 3 times. I was stalked. I was, well, obviously beaten, raped, and I was under constant death threats of being sold into human trafficking. I mean, I lost everything in a fire. It was unreal, unreal.
I'm,
And all this while I'm nursing,
yeah.
right? So I go to work because it took me out of my own pain. I was able to focus on wounds, on other people's care, on their needs, because it took me out of me. So I was working 12, 16-hour shifts and just, two jobs and trying. I didn't want to go home, and until the day where I couldn't pretend anymore. In 2007, I had such a burnout. Like I had just escaped him in 2007. His last words to me is, "I'm going to take your bloody, I hope your
That's
bloody
all right.
battered body, tie you up, put you in a truck, roll you down a hill, and burn you alive, you stupid, useless," right?
Yeah,
And then he
wow.
keeps strangling me with one hand and punching me in the face with the other. And he says, "Do you doubt me?" Because we were far, really, really, really far in northern Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "No one will ever find you." And he was right. And I knew in that moment that if I didn't get out now, that this is it, right? My daughter this is it.
You might not.
So I managed to escape, and I managed to escape. And a year later, I mean, I was back to nursing, back to doing the same thing, but nothing had been dealt with. By this time, I'm 40. I hadn't addressed a single issue.
Yeah.
So one night I show up on my night shift. I'm at work. I got a patient list of 10 people to take care of. And I'm looking at the sheet and I couldn't read it. It was like it was Chinese. I could not see the words.
Oh, wow.
And I knew I was done. I knew that I couldn't pretend. I knew that I couldn't wear that mask any longer. So I turned around and I quit my job and I went from the medical unit down to the psychiatric unit.
Oh,
And in between the two, I lost my mind. It was just like 40 years of repressed trauma and pain. It just came shooting out like a geyser. And I get down to the psych unit and it's locked, of course, right?
oh.
And I'm pounding on the unit. I'm in my nursing scrubs, right?
Yeah.
And I'm pounding on the unit. I'm like, "Let me in, let me in." They actually called security. "Get her out, get her."
Oh, wow. Ah. Oh,
So but they brought me down to the emergency to the rubber room so I wouldn't hurt myself, and
mm-hmm.
where I was assessed by a psychiatric doctor. And for the first time in 40 years, I actually spoke. I actually talked about it. And I was sure that he was going to diagnose me and, number one, put me under 72-hour observation, right?
Yeah.
And diagnose me with either bipolar, schizophrenic, multiple personality, or something along those
And
lines.
just to basically dismiss it.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
no, you know what he did? He looks at me because he had written down all the notes, and he looks at his sheet and he says, I said, "Are you going to take me there?" And he goes, "Take you where? You're not going anywhere." He says, he looks at his sheet. He says, "Ma'am, you need to address these issues. That
Mm.
is your problem." He says, "Number one, you quit drinking. And number two, there's no amount of pills on this earth that are going to fix the pain and sorrow that you're carrying. You
Mm.
got to go deal with that."
Mm.
And I was really confused because I didn't realize how much I was drinking at the time.
Yeah.
And so I did go to a 3-week rehab place that the hospital provided, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I had so much. There was so many layers and layers and layers. And although I would take 2 steps forward, I'd take 5 back, right? So that's how I ended up at the age of 42, drunk and homeless, having lost my nursing career for good and completely lost with no hope. And I slashed my arm. I ended up in the hospital. If you see my arm, it's completely
Yes,
mangled.
I saw the images. Yep.
Yeah, I should be dead, really, but clearly God has a bigger purpose for
Of
me.
course.
So on the 7th day of being homeless, this is another guardian angel. 7th day. So now I'm depressed beyond depressed. I was even robbed. Okay, I'm one of those homeless people with no backpack. I had no identification. I had literally the clothes on my back. So on the 7th day, this guy named Toothless Joe, and he's happy with his way of life, and that's fine, right?
Yep. Yep.
So I'm kind of moping around, and he slaps me on the back, and he goes like, "This is the life, live it, love it."
Uh,
And when he slapped me on the back, it's as if that cloud of depression, that fog, it just shattered. And for 1 second, I saw crystal clear. And I'm looking at my surroundings, which were very dismal, I might add. And I'm looking at him and I'm like, "What did you just say?" And
yeah.
I said, "This is not my life. I
No.
don't care what you think is okay. This is not my life." I even stomped my foot. But the critical thing was that in that moment, I made a decision.
Yeah.
And that decision was that no matter what, even though I had nothing, I had my mind, and I would do whatever it took to get away from that guy. Like, my story was not going to end standing beside Toothless Joe, right? That was it. So I turned around, I went to the hospital, I detoxed for a couple of weeks, and then I went back to the women's program that I had been in and out of for a while. It's a year-long faith-based program
Hmm.
called Wellspring, and you live there with 25 other addicts, other women. Some are from prison, some are from the street, some are
Yeah.
just someone like me, just a nurse who's, lots of trauma. But you have your own room, you have a roof over your head, you have 3 square meals a day, you have constant Monday to Friday, 9 to 4 counseling. It starts out with Bible study, and then what it is, it's you talk about boundaries. There's a codependency course, there's anger management, there's self-esteem, there's a 12-week, very intense sexual assault recovery group, which I had to take twice
Hmm.
because I had so much trauma. So that time was so critical for me because I got to unlearn all the stuff from a child and relearn and then accept that I am what I believe I am. I am not defined by my past, and I am most certainly not defined by the opinions of other people, right?
Yes.
That
Yes.
I am enough just the way I am. But that took a long time to get to say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so in this whole transition phase in my discovering who Kathy really was at the age of 42, I had to figure out, well, what am I going to be when I grow up now?
Yeah, I'm
Because
just wondering if we could just hop back a few steps. You talked about
sure,
this guardian angel on the bridge whom you were present with, the key word
yep,
being present. And I was
yep,
also watching inside your video, Kathy, where you mentioned Eckhart Tolle, and where he says relationships do not cause pain and unhappiness; they bring out the pain and unhappiness that is already
yeah,
within you. These to
yeah.
me really struck me. That idea of living in the now. Can you talk a little bit about this idea of being present and how important it was for you in your, I guess, your healing path?
I had to, that was one of the biggest things in the recovery process was learning to not constantly be pulled into the past. That my past, like I said, my past was not, I am not defined by my past, right?
Yes.
But in order to do that, in order to be able to live in the now and in the present and be whole and be, good, I had to actually go back and I actually had to face certain issues. I had to face my inner child. I had to address, I had to write many letters of anger, letters of forgiveness, letters of love, all these things. I had to go inside and get the root cause of the problem, just like gardening, right? You want to
Yep.
weed it out,
Yep.
you got to pull it out at the roots. That's what I had to do. But that takes time, right? Now I can talk about it and be okay and not burst into tears and get all these
Oh,
flashbacks and
yeah, I can
stuff.
only imagine.
So, but it took a lot of time to be able to do that. But now I'm free. I'm literally I'm free of that. And it is the biggest blessing I could ever wish upon anybody. But
Yeah.
in order to get there, you do have to look at yourself.
Oh, I'm just sitting here catching my breath and sighing. Just as an individual myself, you look around, you go, I wish, things were different. But, there's a journey, there's a path for every one of us for whatever reason that hidden reason might be. Kathy, did you find it very difficult to put the pen to paper to write your book, Big Dream?
Actually, no. I've always said I was going to write a book, and throughout my therapy, we had to journal every day, right?
Right.
Every day, and
Yeah.
we had to write letters. And I'm really good. Although I'm French speaking is my first language, I'm really good in English.
Yes.
But So, but no, when I decided that actually how this came about, we had a huge forest fire here, and the mine where I work now was shut down. And I don't know if you know the motivational speaker Les Brown. He's
No, I've
huge,
heard the
right?
name. Yep, yep, yep.
Yeah, he's huge. He was coming to Edmonton, and it turns out because of the fire, I wasn't at work, so I got to go to this Get Motivated seminar, and it was a 12-hour thing where all these big stars were coming, and in there was a black card books who said, if you want to be a speaker, if you want to really make a change in your life, write a book. It doesn't have to be a big book, just a little book, right?
Yep,
But
yep.
write a book because all of a sudden you're not just a speaker, you're an author. It gives you credibility, right?
Hmm.
And so the way they explained it, the light went off. I'm like, well, yeah, I was always going to write a book anyway.
Yeah.
So with that, the next weekend when I went back to work, and I'll get into my work job after because it's so awesome.
I'd love
But
to
I
talk
sit in
about that. You know I would.
yeah, I know. I sit in a truck, and this just so happened it was in the summer, and in the summer my job is to water down the roads in the mine. So
Hmm.
it's a truck that holds 208,000 liters or 52,000 gallons. I don't know what you're in, but it's a lot of water.
Imperial metric,
So
that's a lot.
it's a lot of water. But I have to sit under this water tree, this pipe that fills up the tank, and
Yes.
it takes 30 minutes every time. I'm under that tank at least 12 to 15 times a day because I work 13-hour shifts.
Yep.
So it was in those 30-minute moments that I actually because we're not allowed electronics, I put pen to paper and I hand
Ah,
wrote the book
wow.
in a month. It just came out,
I bet it
and
did.
I never looked at it again. I went back home, and then I was able to actually sit there, and I had an outline in my head of what I wanted,
Yep.
and then I just typed it up, and within a year the whole thing was out. And now the book is available in French, and I just found that the Spanish translation will be done by November.
That's amazing. Can I ask you,
Yeah.
how did you feel when you wrote the last word in that book?
Oh, I can't. Oh, the
You know that moment that
that moment that I did it.
you did
I
it.
did it.
Yeah,
To
amazing.
all those who said
Congratulations.
that I'd never accomplish anything, that I was too stupid to live, that I was a waste of
Ah,
skin, all
no.
the stuff. I mean, who's driving this truck? Who wrote this book? Who's
Yes.
traveling the world?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. You are an amazing soul, and there are reasons for people being who they are and experiencing what they have experienced now, regardless of how traumatic and awful these things were. You know what? Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Now, if people want to learn more about you, get access to you, where are they going to find you?
My website is currently being redone. I mean, I
Right.
have a new fellow, but you can still access it. It's my name, Kathy Tuccaro, Kathy with a K, Tuccaro.com. That's it.
Fantastic.
And there's a contact page on there. My book is on Amazon. It's on Kindle, Kobo, I think something else. Yeah.
It's all out there.
Um, because even though I say I drive a truck, let me talk 2 minutes about my truck.
Sure.
Oh, I have to.
You
I
have
have to.
to.
It's not just a truck. For the listeners, when you say I drive a big truck, you think the ones that go down the road, right? The 18-wheelers, like, the those trucks, that's not what I drive. No, no, no. I drive, let me put it into perspective for you. Get an image of this.
Yes.
A 2.5-story high, 3,800 square foot monster of a truck that weighs 1 million pounds of metal, and it
Yes.
carries 400 tons of dirt on its back.
And
I drive a house.
now, for everybody who's thinking that, if you've ever seen a Monster Jam truck, one of those, racing car trucks, I guess you'd call them, it
Yeah,
it makes them look like Tinker Toys.
it does. It really, really does. Even
Oh,
if you just go to the website to see the truck, by all means, you got to check it out.
well, look, everybody who's on this call today, those the people sitting in the shadows and not wondering whether or not they can get help with anything that's happening in their life, regardless of what it is, you are important, you are valuable, you are beautiful. Kathy, on that note, thank you so much for spending some time with me on the My Future Business show today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a delight.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the call, then make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, share us with your friends, and book your spot on the show at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. And if you're looking for solutions that will help grow your business, then visit myfuturebusiness.com/shop.